I'm really sorry. I get nervous. Okay, let me just make sure that I have my slides in order.
Yes,
The silent classroom never got the papers.
that's because there are only 8 or 9 speakers and they ran out.
Oh,
You'll get one another night.
all right.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of a business relocating its business to a different nation, you assume it is for the purpose of saving production costs, but some people think at what cost. My proposition is that the mutual relationship between nations, government, and a foreign company negatively affect a residential population, the foreign population, and the environment due to the nation's lack of regulation on foreign companies and corruption. So my first claim is that the nation's lack regulation of foreign companies causes negligence towards the workers and the environment. So first of all, most nations have a minimum wage, but that minimum wage is unstable. So for example, in Indonesia, there's more than one sector that determines the minimum wage for each person, and it also can be different for each person. So not only that, but it also sets itself as an example for the amount of pay that person should get in that foreign company. So, for example, in Australia Networks News, Tom Maddox stated Indonesian workers began to demand higher wages, more than 50 cents due to the cost of living increasing. The government does not enforce workers to be paid more due to the fear that the future foreign investments will be scared off. So the lack of regulations and sternness of the government as well influences the amount that person should get paid. So secondly, the nation's government and foreign companies do not regulate sweatshops and treatment of workers. For example, Nike harasses their employees and creates sweatshops, but the workers in some cases are not allowed to have restroom breaks and are forced to work more than 8 hours a day and are locked up and not allowed to leave until they have produced a certain amount of shoes or shirts or whatnot. The Nike company, to avoid prosecution, they had to change their production area, so they were constantly moving to remote locations. And then the supervisors forced workers to stand under the sun due to not meeting the production requirements. So that is also an example of how the employees were in a sense taken advantage of and harassed. As stated by Daily Mail reporter, so that is where I got that information, and the Indonesian government has put no halt to it since the protective labor laws are poorly enforced due to cheap labor being abundant. Thirdly, the nation government does not enforce proper weight of waste such as Indonesian government. The reported figure of the waste indicates that there remains a huge gap of approximately 16.4% or 1.5 million tons of industrial waste generated annually that goes unmanaged or unreported. So my second example of how that also affects the environment is that the Chevron unleashed a toxic in Ecuador by leaving over 600 oil pits in pristine northern Amazon rainforest and dumping 18 billion gallons of toxic production into rivers used for bathing water. The local community suffered, as well as they got cancer, birth defects, or spontaneous abortions, and they also massacred wildlife as well, such as birds and cows, whichever harmed people of the region and environment. So the lack of government and the government regulation in Ecuador and the foreign company are to blame. So the people of the land were also abused. So my second claim is lack of regulation in people and environment lead to corruption within the nation. It takes place in nations and government foreign company. So for example, the foreign company gives bribery to supervisors of production line to work long hours and pay less and more physical abuse. So to detect the corruption is difficult since it requires special skills, and not all nations are properly equipped with those skills. So in addition, bribery allows the exposition of children and workers to dangerous, hazardous chemicals and machinery. And for example, in Indonesia, the children are engaged in the worst form of child labor, mainly in dangerous activities and agriculture and domestic work. Evidence suggests many are exposed to extreme weather, the use of dangerous objects, falls from dangerous heights, and harmful chemicals. And I got this excerpt from Finding Out the Worst Forms of Child Labor. Do I continue?
Well, I mean,
Well, I'm almost done.
then keep going.
Okay, so
Wrap it up.
also, the company manipulates paperwork for their benefits. So for example, the supervisors of Walmart in Mexico manipulated paperwork, and that point was that they gained multiple licenses for multiple Walmarts in the way they created monopolies. So it was a form of monopoly. So my third claim is that foreign businesses affect the people from where the foreign company originated. It could have produced more jobs for their people and increased their economy. So in conclusion, the foreign businesses and the nation's government of the employees are negatively impacted, as well as the environment, the people from the nation, and also the people that originated from the foreign company. Thank God it's over.
I try to control it, but it kind of looks like. Sorry, it seems to
All right, Esmeralda, the proposition that you have is way too complicated. It's got a whole bunch of dependent clauses. It sounds like you're talking about 3 different issues here, so it really needs to be simplified for an oral presentation. You do have a pretty good preview of what the contents are going to be, but you're rushing through that preview, and then when we get to the body of the speech, I was listening to your signposts as we went along, but it sounded to me like you had many more secondary points than you listed in the preview. And in fact, I was, getting ready for point number 4. Suddenly, point number 2 came up, and so it was a little bit confusing. And you say your third claim, and it actually seems like it's the 6th claim to me. So I think what happened is that you had some minor points that you were counting in a little bit. In a manner that is way too reminiscent of the main signposts, and so they get a little bit confused, and you need to be clear on that. You need to have a little bit more explanation about what the argument is and what the conclusion that you're trying to draw is. There's no doubt that there's corruption in other countries. There's no doubt that environmental laws are not always enforced. The question is this a result of the actions of these foreign-based companies? Are the companies producing this particular result? Are they manipulating the countries in some way, shape, or form? I think that's the inference that you're trying to make. That needs to be a lot clearer. I was a little confused with one of the examples because the information that was being cited had to do with agricultural and domestic work, and I'm trying to figure out how those things are connected to the foreign corporations that you're talking about. Now, if there is some foreign corporation that hires domestic people and then abuses them in the countries, then I guess that would fit into that category, but it was not very clear how those things fit. On the individual points, at best, you've got a couple of examples to support your conclusions. I do think you need a little bit more expert testimony to back those up. There's not any statistical information to suggest how widespread these things are, so we're really dependent on the examples. So you mentioned, for instance, this incident where there's Chevron dumps pollutants into a waterway in Ecuador, I believe it was, and then there's a whole general claim about all the negative things that it did to that waterway. I don't get a source citation on that, and I don't know how typical that was. I don't know if that was an accident, if it was intentional, if there was cleanup, if there was not cleanup, whether or not Chevron denies any of these kinds of things. I just got a vague reference to the incident, and you need to be a little bit sharper in citing your information on that. I did think that you tried a little bit more effectively at the end to kind of tell us what the argument was again and make it a little bit clearer. But like I said from the beginning, you just have too many component parts in that main proposition, and it just feels like I'm getting a series of random examples of bad things that happen in other countries. And we need to know what inference you want us to draw from that, and that's the problem. All right, thank you.